everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GBNews,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey here to bring you up to date on GB News. The government has referred Archie Battersby's case back to the High Court for urgent consideration. It's after the 12-year-old's parents were told by Bart's Health NHS Trust that his life support treatment will end tomorrow at 2 p.m. The charity supporting his family says the latest move is a result of the UN's intervention. Archie, who's in a coma after suffering brain damage, has been the subject of an ongoing legal battle. A High Court judge had previously ruled it's in the child's best interests to disconnect his ventilator. Tory leadership candidate Liz Truss says there will be no second independence vote in Scotland if she becomes Prime Minister. Instead, the Foreign Secretary told the Sunday Telegraph she'll focus on strengthening the union. Ahead in the polls, she's garnering support from party heavyweights. The former Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, is the latest big name to publicly back her.
We've consistently had challenges, whether it's about dealing with free ports, getting the VAT reduction we've seen for the rest of the UK that we can't deliver in Northern Ireland because of the protocol. We've had real resistance all the way through from the Treasury. It's great to see Richie the other night at the hustings saying that he thought the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill was resolve issues. It's good to see him come to that conclusion now. But the bill is in Parliament and has gone through the House of Commons because of the focus and determination and work of Liz Truss.
Meanwhile, patients who fail to turn up for appointments could be fined if Richie Sunak wins the Tory leadership race. The former Chancellor promised to reform the NHS, saying he'll introduce £10 fines for those who repeatedly miss GP or outpatient consultations. He told the Sunday Telegraph he wants to do something brave and different. But GPs such as Dr Mo Kaki are warning the move could be counterproductive.
A fine of that sort of nature would definitely make people feel more anxious, feel more stressed. We know life events are challenging. We know so many things happen. I think we need to have some flexibility and understanding at this time, especially when people are really struggling and facing a lot of challenge. So I think we need to really be careful with how we try to enforce and improve appointment attendance.
The International Red Cross has strongly condemned an attack that killed dozens of Ukrainian prisoners of war. Moscow claims it's invited the organisation to investigate the deaths, but the Red Cross says it's not yet received permission to visit the site. It comes as President Zelensky issued a mandatory evacuation order to Ukrainians in the eastern region of Donetsk. He warned residents that their lives are at risk if they stay in the contested area.
There are hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of children. Many refuse to leave, but it really needs to be done. This decision will have to be taken, regardless. Believe me. And the sooner it is made, the more people leave Donetsk region now, the fewer people that the Russian army will have time to kill. Therefore, if you have the opportunity, please talk to those who continue to remain in combat zones in Donbass. Please convince them that it is necessary to leave.
Meanwhile, in the US, a governor in Crimea says Ukrainian forces have hit the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The attack coincided with Russia's Navy Day, which featured a military parade in St. Petersburg. President Vladimir Putin marked the occasion by announcing the Navy will receive hypersonic Zircon cruise missiles in the next few months, capable of travelling 9 times the speed of sound. Now to the US, the number of people killed in the floods in Kentucky has climbed to 26. But there are fears that figure will continue to rise, with the governor saying more victims could be found in the debris. He described it as one of the most devastating flooding events in the state's history. President Joe Biden has declared a national emergency. At the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, Team England says cyclist Matt Walls is alert and talking after a crash at the velodrome in London. 2 spectators were also hurt when the 24-year-old Olympic champion flew over a barrier and into the crowd. Walls and 2 other riders were taken to hospital. A Canadian cyclist was disqualified from the race for causing the initial crash. We're glad he's doing okay. And it's 0-0 at half-time in the Women's Euro 2022 final. For those who couldn't get tickets to Wembley, fan zones have been set up across the country. These are live pictures from Croydon in South London. The hopes of a nation are resting on the Lionesses, who are playing Germany in front of a sellout crowd at Wembley Stadium. Well, good luck to them. Let's hope they can bring it home on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We'll bring you more soon.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking mostly dry but cloudy, with some showers affecting southern and eastern England. Let's take a look at the details. Across southwest England, it will be a dry end of the day, albeit quite cloudy, though there is a chance of the odd bright or sunny spell throughout the evening. For London and southeast England, for many, it will be a dry evening, though there may be an odd shower that could be heavy. Across Wales, a mainly dry evening with just the odd spot of rain over the hill. Some late evening sunshine, particularly around the west area. Mainly dry across the Midlands to end the weekend, though there may be the odd isolated shower this evening right in the south. There will be some sunny spells also, especially in the west. After a generally grey and damp day, it's a warm and cloudy evening ahead for northeast England, but it will be mainly dry, with just the odd spot of light rain over the Pennines. It's going to be a fine end to the day for southern Scotland, with a decent amount of late evening sunshine around, particularly in the west of the country. The fine and dry weather is going to continue across Northern Ireland this evening, with plenty of late evening sunshine here. Also, though, there'll be some patchy cloud as well. Showers fading for most tonight and clear spells developing in the northwest. Warm and humid in the south and east. And that's how the weather is shaping up overnight until tomorrow morning.
Good morning, you're watching and listening to GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Deanna Davison, and today I'm joined in the studio by Carolyn Harris, Welsh Labour Deputy Leader and the MP for Swansea East. And the former Conservative Cabinet Minister David Mellor will be joining us shortly. Coming up this hour, we'll be joined by an MP supporting Richie Sunak and an MP supporting Liz Truss to discuss their new policy pledges. From the Sunak camp, a £10 charge if you fail to show up for a GP or hospital appointment. And from the Truss camp, help for generation rents with a shake-up to mortgage affordability rules. Following the sacking of Shadow Minister for Transport, we'll be analysing Sir Keir Starmer's leadership and what his flagship policies actually are. And is today the day when football is finally coming home? We'll be speaking to the captain of the first ever Women's FA Cup winning team about what we can expect from the Women's Euros final this evening. Well, kicking off our show today, rail passengers faced chaos after staff walked out in a dispute over pay and working conditions. Wednesday and Saturday saw a combined 47,000 workers leave their posts, leaving millions stranded at stations across the country. But it was Keir Starmer who stole the headlines after Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry was sacked for giving a series of interviews that were not in line with party policy. So, Carolyn, I want to come to you first on this because clearly this is a big Labour story. There has been critique about whether or not Labour MPs should be allowed on picket lines. Tell us what's really going on.
Well, I don't believe this is about picket lines. I believe this is about somebody freelancing when they're not in a position to do that. You make a decision in politics if you want to be on the front bench or you want to be on the back bench. If you're on the back bench, you've got a lot more freedom. If you're on the front bench, you need to stick to the party lines and you need to do the media interviews you're asked to do. Sam didn't do that. Sam went off and give forth his own idea of what the policy should be, and he wasn't in a position to do that. So, unfortunately, he was sacked, rightly so, because you can't just decide what policy is for a whole party without getting clarification that that's OK to do.
And his narrative, though, has been more that he's been sacked for being on the picket line. Are you saying that's absolutely not the case?
That's not the case. I mean, but other front benchers went on the picket line. That's not the case. The case is, for a start, Sam introduced himself as the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport. He's not. That's Lew Haig. It's very disrespectful of Lew that he actually said that. And as for him being sacked, he was actually organised his own media round, give a story about what he felt should have been the policy, which is not the policy of the party. You can't do that on the front bench. You have to come with me on the back benches and be campaigning.
It's very fun being on the back benches, I must say. David, I'm keen to bring you in on this. Tell us a little bit about that sort of collective responsibility there, because Carolyn's just said, you know, as a sort of shadow minister, you can't just go make policy up on the hoof, can you?
No, you can't. And I must say, I suppose I'm not here to really do that, but I agreed with every word that Carolyn had to say. I mean, if you want to be a backbencher, I spent time as a backbencher, you're free to take up whatever causes you want. If you join the front bench, you are bound by collective responsibility, but you're also bound by party discipline. And you simply can't have people wandering off, joining picket lines against the advice of the leader and then misdescribing themselves. And I think a spell on the backbenchers will not do Sam Tarry any harm, and I don't imagine he'll be there for very long. I think the problem for the Labour Party is it opens up the gaps that there are between the current leader and his deputy, who is, after all, Mr. Tarry's partner. So it's a pretty sensitive issue, I would have thought, for the Labour Party in general.
Carolyn, are you seeing that it seems to be sort of playing out as this sort of Labour versus the unions thing? Are you concerned that the unions feel that the Labour Party under Keir isn't on their side as it was under Jeremy Corbyn?
They're two very different leaders, and Keir is far more pragmatic than Jeremy ever was and realises that we have to work with the unions, but we've also got to appeal to the public in order to get elected at the next general election when it comes. So Keir's relationship with the unions is fine. I think this whole episode has been blown up to make it look as if it's a unions versus Labour battle, and it's not. This is purely about somebody not toeing the line. When they accept the responsibility of being on the front bench, then you cannot do anything you want to. If Sam's allowed to get away with it, anybody can go on TV and make a policy they're going along, and it's just not acceptable.
I think it's interesting it's happening over this as well, because, as you say, the headline has been more about Keir, but actually these rail strikes have been pretty devastating for people. I mean, I was reading an article earlier on this morning about how they really hit the Commonwealth Games, which obviously kicked off in Birmingham earlier this week to much fanfare, and yet there were people who were unable to get to events they'd booked. What do you make of it, Carolyn? Do you think that the unions are right on this one? Do you think they should be going on strike, or do you think they're going a little bit too far and causing maximum devastation?
I mean, the unions are doing what the unions do. They are sticking up for their workers and they are fighting for their workers' pay and working conditions, and I respect them and I respect their right to do that. I don't believe anyone on strike actually wants to be out on strike, and they wouldn't be wanting to lose the money, especially under the current climate. So they are doing it because they really feel there is no other option. What we really need to see is the Secretary of State for Transport getting round the table with the unions, with Network Rail and coming up with the right kind of answer to solve these problems. This accusations of the unions are wrong and the workforce is wrong, that needs to stop. That's not the narrative that's going to solve this problem. We need communication and we need negotiation.
And David, I'm curious your take on the response from the Transport Secretary and actually indeed some of the leadership candidates about potentially introducing kind of minimum worker limits on the rail service and other essential services if there was a strike called. Would you support that?
Of course, because they've got to do something. I mean, look, let me begin, first of all, by declaring an interest in this. I am not some sad Tory toff looking down my nose at people who work on the railways. One of my grandfathers joined the Union of Railway Workers at the time of the Taff Vale case, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. And my other grandfather worked the whole of his career after he left the army in the First World War as a railway guard, in the days when railway guards were dressed in three-piece suits and had their watch chains and took pride in what they did. So that's my background. Now, I do not believe it's in the best interests of the railway industry that there should be this strike. And I'm happy to tell you that a lot of other people are working for far less than railway workers get and are being hugely inconvenienced by this. And what it really comes down to is the political motivation of a lot of the union leaders who obviously see this as a way of slapping a government that's had got a bad time, just slapping them round the face. And I personally think that this is not the right time to do it, that this is a profoundly anti-social act and is causing huge inconvenience to people who don't deserve it.
Carolyn, quick response?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the railways have kept going throughout the pandemic. They went to work day in, day out, and that's not been acknowledged. They've certainly not been rewarded. And, you know, as much as I don't want to see anybody striking, I do really understand why they put themselves in this position. And like I said, they don't want to lose the money, but they've got to do something because nobody's helping them. The government needs to talk to the unions. They need to get this problem solved. The country needs this problem solved.
Well, send us your views. Have you been impacted by the rail strikes? Do you think the unions are right to be out on strike? Let us know on GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBnews. And we're hoping to get David back in just a moment. Now, Liz Truss has promised to help millions of renters buy their first home by allowing their rent payment record to be used as evidence for when they apply for a mortgage. The current frontrunner for the Premiership also said she will tear down red tape that's holding back building more homes. So, Carolyn, we had a bit of a discussion about this sort of yesterday when we were talking about the show anyway. What do you make of this policy? Because there are an awful lot of people out there who can afford to rent. They've got clear records of paying their rent on time. A mortgage might even be cheaper. And yet that record of good payments can't currently be used to help them get on the housing ladder.
I mean, I think it's really unfair that any rented accommodation is not taken into account in any kind of creditor agreement, which is grossly unfair because that money is still money that they pay in on a regular basis. And so, you know, hold the front page. I actually agree with Liz Truss on this, but
GB News exclusive.
But that's not the end of the problem. Is that we've got really poor housing stock. People who are looking to buy a house struggle to get the deposit. There isn't a lot of affordable homes out there. Thankfully, in Wales, we have got schemes to help people get on the property ladder, and they are adapted to suit different geographical areas, different needs, and so on and so forth. But we need better housing stock, and we need more help for people to buy houses, and we need them to have help to get the deposit together. That's the biggest issue with preventing people actually buying their own homes.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and that's why supply is so important. It's why we always talk about house building.
I mean, I bought my house when I was 18. I paid £7,000 for it. You know, I mean, where would you get something for £7,000? A holiday would cost you £7,000 today if you're going on something, a fancy cruise. But I mean, we're at a time in our lives when I don't think my son will ever own his own home when he's 36 because, you know, it's difficult to get that deposit together. It's difficult to actually find an affordable property. It's difficult to be able to get that kind of money. Yet he's paid rent all his life. You know, he's paid rent since he was 20 and he left home. But, you know, for him getting a house, Very, very difficult.
Yeah, I know it's something that younger people in particular are really concerned about. I don't own a home. I'd love to, but at the minute I'm just not in a position to. And that's on, a fantastic MP salary that I'm very fortunate to have.
If I hadn't bought a house when I was 18 and it was dirt cheap and my parents helped me, we wouldn't have a house now.
Yeah, astonishing. Well, David, let's come to you on this. What did you make of Liz Truss's policy announcement there on allowing rent repayments to be taken into account for mortgage affordability? Do you think it's the right approach?
I think there has to be some imagination shown to deal with the problems of inflation as it impacts on housing. I mean, I'm talking to you now from a cottage in Dorset, a few miles from where I was born, and where my father was a state school teacher, and where I was entirely state educated. And I was advised by a friend of mine who's an estate agent down here that since the beginning of lockdown, house prices in this part of Dorset have gone up 20%. Now, that is unaffordable for most normal people. And I think that what we want from our politicians are some new big ideas. And she should particularly remember, and I'm sure she does, is she's a bit of a Margaret Thatcher mini-me, isn't she? And what she needs to remember is that Margaret Thatcher gained a huge amount of credit when she, for instance, decided to make it compulsory for people to be able to buy their own council homes and facilitated a huge expansion in home ownership. And we need a policy like that that suits the present time, and where what we can't do is just sit back and let this whole thing wash over us.
Mm-hmm. And Carolyn, I'm curious where you stand on that. David obviously mentioned the right to buy scheme, but do you have concerns that the sort of social housing stock hasn't been replenished in that time?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, the right to buy, I remember when it first came out and it was hailed as a landmark policy, but we never built the social housing to actually replace the properties that were being sold. And now there's double a number of people actually in privately rented accommodation now there is in social housing. Traditionally, social housing will be better landlords than the private sector. It can be very precarious for both. You could end up with a bad tenant or a bad landlord. It's a far more precarious situation. And I just think if we're going to be allowing people to buy social housing homes, then we've got to find a way of replacing that stock, and quickly. I mean, that money was just not used right.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting. I think housing definitely is one of the key issues that certainly my friends and peers and those a little bit younger as well, sort of coming into adulthood now, are really concerned about. As you said, you're concerned your son might not be able to buy a home. And it's not just about buying. I mean, some people don't want to buy a home necessarily, but rental prices in some parts of the country, particularly the cities, are absolutely astonishing these days.
Especially London. I mean, it's just insane. You could probably buy a street of houses in Swansea for what you'd pay for one house in London. It's
likewise in Bishop Auckland.
It's madness, just absolutely madness.
Yeah, it's so disproportionate. So we need to get it fixed, but it's really good, I think, hearing both the leadership candidates from the Conservative Party talking about it, and we'll be looking forward to Keir's policy as well on housing as we get closer to that election as well. Well, stay with us, because after the break, we'll be asking whether we've had too many debates between the candidates for the Tory leadership. And what do MPs do during a parliamentary recess? Well, stay tuned to find out. We'll give you all the knowledge.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory. twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Now, we thought it'd be interesting to ask David about how leadership elections have changed since his time in Parliament. And this one in particular, has it become a little bit toxic? So, David, tell us a little bit about your reflections, because leadership elections have changed quite a bit over the decades, haven't they?
They have. They have. What there has been a movement towards is to try and get more people who are involved with the Conservative Party involved in these elections. It was always regarded in the past as being a matter for Conservative members of Parliament, because they were the ones who, after all, saw these leaders and potential leaders up close and understood them. Personally, I think it would have been far better if that had been the way that had been chosen this time, because you see, what people forget is how minimal party membership is. When I was the MP for Putney for nearly 20 years in the 70s, 80s and early 90s, my constituency alone had between 3,000 and 5,000 members.
Wow.
Now, out of 650 constituencies, it's now said, and obviously they don't really know how many members there are in the Conservative Party, but they now say, having started off saying, well, it was around 200,000, they've now settled for 160,000. You do the divisions, 650, you divide 160,000 by 650, it's pathetic and minimal. And the problem is, if we're not careful, 0.2% of the British public are going to choose the next Prime Minister. And they're not likely, let's be honest, to be the most progressive thinking people. And the worry I've always had is that someone like Richie Sunak was not going to get it for no better reason than that there was some resentment against him by core Tory members because of his alleged role in getting rid of Boris. I am now less worried about that, as it appears clear that Liz Truss has established a serious lead, not just amongst, it would appear, the members, but also amongst leading front benchers. And the fact that the Defence Secretary came out in favour of her and so on, to the point that if I was a friend of Richie Sunak's and he rang me up and said, come on, David, what should I do? I would say, back down. I would say, do not put the party through an unnecessary election. Do a deal with Liz Truss. Work out a job that would be acceptable to you. Liz Truss had any sense, she'd jump at it. Because, I don't think it does the Conservative Party any good. This ridiculous bickering that there's been between these leadership candidates, first of all, because it appears they don't like each other. And I don't think that's helpful if we're in the same party. But even worse than that, I mean, there's no easy way to say this. A lot of them don't seem very big people in terms of their ideas and the way they put things forward. I can still remember Margaret Thatcher's, one or two of her leadership elections, even the John Major one. I mean, when John Major ran for the leadership against Michael Heseltine, no one could say that Michael Heseltine wasn't a big beast, and John became, during the course of this, a big beast. Do we really think that either Sunak or Liz Truss are big beasts? They may become big beasts, but as of now, they are not big beasts, and I'm not sure whether all this nonsense is a great advert for the Conservative Party, which is perhaps trespassing on the good nature of the voters to too great a degree at the moment.
Well, David, thank you for that. You mentioned there, of course, frontbench backers. Well, very topically, we're now actually going to be joined by one of those backers, by the former Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis, who's come out in support of Liz Truss. Brandon, in your opinion, what is it that Liz has got that Rishi doesn't?
Good morning. Yes, I'm back in Liz because, look, a couple of things. So I've known Liz a long time. We're fellow Norfolk MPs. We were fellow Norfolk candidates before the 2010 election. And what I've consistently seen with Liz is somebody who cares passionately about delivering for her constituents, her community, and as part of that community, the wider country. And more recently, in my role as the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and her role as the Foreign Secretary, I've seen her determination to deliver for the United Kingdom, both actually previously in her role delivering the trade deals at the Department for International Trade, but as Foreign Secretary in dealing with the issues that she had to pick up in December last year around the Northern Ireland Protocol. And she and I introduced the Northern Ireland Protocol bill just a few weeks ago, and that was a manifestation of her determination to drive that through, get it done, one of the more difficult, challenging things we've had to deal with over the last couple of years. And we wouldn't have got that done without her focus and determination. And that ability to deliver and drive things, I think, is really key in a Prime Minister.
And Brandon, I'm not sure if you caught David Mellor there talking about the sort of infighting within the party and how that kind of goes down with the public. Well, I read the article about your backing for Liz, and the headline of it is, Richie Sunak was too focused on keeping the EU happy over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Do you think that sort of strikes the right sort of tone? Or do you think we need to be a bit more friendly to our opponents in this?
Well, yes, I heard most of your conversation with David, actually, and obviously the rules over the leadership structure changed and how we choose our leaders back in, I think it was about 1997. And obviously I've been involved in leadership campaigns from 2001 with Ian Duncan Smith all the way through to this one. And I chaired the last one, so I was responsible for organising the last leadership campaign. And look, the reality is I've written myself in the last few weeks. We've got a very big, wide open tent. The strength of the Conservative Party is we have so many different people with different views. One of, again, the benefits of somebody like Liz Truss, I think, as a leader of our party, is that she has brought together, just in the last few days, if you look at myself, Ben Wallace, Tom Tugendhat, we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg, you've got people from all corners of the party coming together to support Liz, which I think shows she can bring people together. And in terms of the article in the Sunday Telegraph today, as you rightly outlined, Deanne, look, I was asked a question about why am I supporting Liz, what's the difference between Liz and Rishi in terms of how they would deal with the EU. I have to talk from the experience I've had as the Northern Ireland Secretary. We've consistently had challenges, whether it's about dealing with free ports, getting the VAT reduction we've seen for the rest of the UK that we can't deliver in Northern Ireland because of the protocol. We've had real resistance all the way through from the Treasury. It's great to see Rishi the other night at the hustings saying that he thought the Northern Ireland Protocol bill was resolve issues. It's good to see him come to that conclusion now. But the bill is in Parliament and has gone through the House of Commons because of the focus and determination and work of Liz Truss driving that as a Foreign Secretary. I introduced that bill with her and Suella Braverman as Attorney General and the work she did in it and myself. We saw that bill through despite there being some real challenges with that. And I think that's the determination that I think is important. And if I'm asked why I'm supporting, I'm going to be honest about the reality of what I've seen as a Secretary of State in terms of why I'm supporting her over somebody else. But we do ultimately all have to come together in a month or so's time behind whoever wins to make sure that we as a party are able to deliver for the country. And I think we as a party have a good track record of doing that.
Let's talk quickly about one of the key policies from Liz Truss this week around housing. We had a bit of a discussion on our show earlier today around using rent repayments, evidence of rent repayments for mortgage affordability. You, of course, used to be housing minister. I'm guessing you think this is the right approach?
Yes, I do. One of the challenges, and I did a couple of years as a housing minister, and it's a hugely important part of our economy because housing delivery and construction drives GDP quite substantially, actually. But it's also important to help more people get on the housing ladder. You've got a lot of people out there at the moment, a huge number of people who are paying rent that is costing per month more than the equivalent property would often cost them in a mortgage. So creating more opportunities for people to have that recognised as part of the assessment, I think, is a really good thing. And the more we can do to get more houses built in the right places for people and people's ability to access those houses is a very good thing. And Diana, can I just say one last thing on your conversation with David that I think is important, as somebody who's been chairman of the Conservative and Unionist Party, is I do think we should be very clear. Our members, and we saw this really clearly in 2019, showed how vital they are to our party and how they register the importance of the decision they're going to be making in terms of the next leader of our party also being Prime Minister. I think they showed that brilliantly well in 2019. And I'm confident that through the hustings and the questions they're asking and the challenges they'll put to the candidates, our members will do us very proud and do that in a really professional way, again, as they always do.
Joining us today, Brandon Lewis, their former Northern Ireland Secretary, telling us why he is backing Liz Truss in the leadership contest. So we were just talking about the leadership debates before we spoke to Brandon. And Carolyn, I'm very curious to get your reflections on this because, of course, your process for choosing a leader is a little bit different to ours. What have you made of the kind of Tory leadership TV debates? And, would you kind of like to see something similar in the Labour Party when it comes to it?
I think they were brutal. I think they've damaged the party. I think they are going to be very difficult to come back from when you have people who are in the same cabinet who are criticising the policies of the government publicly. I think it's been deeply uncomfortable to watch, especially when you had more candidates in. It really was a bun fight. Unfortunately, the only head-to-head we saw ended up being cut short when Kate McCann was taken ill, and they cut it short. But I'm hoping that it's going to be slightly more relaxed this week, because as someone who was a potential voter, if I wasn't committed to a political party, I don't think I could vote Conservative after what I've seen, because it was just dreadful to watch. It was awful.
And David, of course, that's something that's a very kind of new phenomenon, isn't it? These kind of public televised debates between the leadership contenders. I think we saw the first ones in the last leadership contest where Boris Johnson was victorious but didn't actually take part in the first TV debates. No. Do you think they're a good thing for the party? Do you think they're good for transparency, or do you think they're actually pretty harmful for sowing division?
I'm not bothered whether they're good for the party. I'm bothered about whether they're good for British democracy. I think it's now become a sort of Me Too thing, hasn't it, where every television station has got to have its debate with the leader, with the leaders, potential leaders, and quite often I think they are awful. I mean, the one on Channel 4, they just don't do the planning right. Krishna Gunamurthy was plainly entirely the wrong person to have in charge of that. He's not sympathetic to the Conservative Party, and that was perfectly obvious. And I don't think anybody did themselves any good with this. And the question is, where does the party come out of this? I think a lot of people will have watched this and thought, the Conservative Party is a house divided against itself, which, as the good book saith, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I don't understand why there isn't someone in charge of this process who says, look, guys and gals, at the end of this process, you've got to come back together, pretend to like each other, and pretend to be capable of working together for the common good. Every time they have one of these debates, it makes it that much more difficult to try to do that credibly.
Carolyn, I see you nodding there. It looks as though you have some similar reflections from in your own party.
Yeah, I mean, I've never backed Jeremy Corbyn. I backed Andy Burnham the first time. I backed Owen Smith the second time. And Jeremy Corbyn won very decisively, but very divisively. And, the things that were happening during that leadership election and what happened after left us as a very split party. And it's taken for Keir to come in and for the healing to start happening, and now we are a credible party who can win elections. But in 2019, we were a completely divided, unelectable party, and that's where the Tories are going to end up if they're not careful, because they are losing their credibility day on day.
Well, send us your reflections. What have you made?
It's very disappointing to me that we should be paired together, because I'm supposed to be disagreeing with her, but I agree with almost everything she says.
How can you disagree with me?
And I mean, if a party is a shambles, why display yourself in front of the public, say, here we are, we're a shambles, It's not very sensible, is it?
Well, lots of agreement here on the political correction today, which is what we like to see on GB News, the home of good debate. But stick with us, because after the break, we'll be speaking to the Richie Sunak supporter and chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee, Simon Hoare. So don't go anywhere.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. And as always, loads of you have been getting in touch. Thank you for that. First off, we've got John on Richie Sunak's announcement around finding people who miss GP appointments. John says, Rishi wants to find people who miss an appointment with a GP. What about us finding GPs when we can't get an appointment in the first place? John there from Blackpool.
And Sandy is saying, why do we keep talking about a housing crisis without mentioning the cause, i.e. the immigration crisis, which is the real cause of the NHS crisis and crime crisis too?
Yeah, we've had an awful lot of views in around immigration. We've covered the Channel crossings quite a lot on our show. Clearly a factor, but I think there's, real issues around house building and quality housing stock as well, Certainly, I know, I'm guessing maybe similar in your constituency. Some streets have terraces that are kind of boarded up and need a bit of TLC and a bit of love.
Well, most of ours have actually gone to private renters. They buy them up cheap and they rent them. And a lot of people will buy a house and use it as a pension because there's so much insecurity in the pensions market.
Yeah.
So that's a booming trade in Swansea.
Yeah, and then we've got Phil here who says the people who don't attend NHS appointments won't pay the fine. They generally are people who don't give a damn about anything. Chances are they don't work, don't turn up for interviews, rely on the state for handouts, probably can't get out of bed, or if it's raining, don't turn up, so they won't worry about paying the fine. Well, keep on sending us your views on that. Do you think it's the right approach there from Rishi Sunak to introduce fines for people who miss GP appointments? Let us know. And we've got, I think, one more, haven't we, Carolyn?
Yeah, and this is from Barbara, who's not holding back here when she says David Mellor was talking about the big beast Michael Heseltine, who actually had a house in Swansea, which wasn't in very good state of repair, I will say. Heseltine was a big beast and the biggest backstabber of all time. Many members of the party remember him and how nasty he can be, so maybe things haven't changed that much.
Oh, maybe not. Well, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We love to hear from you and we'll be getting to plenty more of those later on in the show. Now, Rishi Sunak has come under some fire this morning following his pledge to fine people who don't show up for NHS appointments, as we've just been discussing. Former Chancellor said he would introduce the £10 fine to help create transformational change in the current healthcare system. Well, joining me now to discuss this recent pledge, maybe not joining me now, joining me in a few moments, will be Simon Hoare. But Carolyn, again, we've kind of discussed this. Do you think that it is the right approach? No,
I really worry about this because the NHS is meant to be free at the point of use, and I really worry that we're going to be expecting people who can ill afford to pay any kinds of fines. I mean, John made a point, it's difficult to get an appointment in the first place. So, I accept that, but I just think that we could be penalising people who really cannot make an appointment for a genuine reason, and it could be they can't afford the bus fare to get to the doctors. So why are we lumbering them with a further fine? There's got to be a better way of getting the list down, but fining people for not turning up is not the answer.
David, what about you? Do you think this is the right approach? Because we know there are tons of missed appointments that do cost the NHS vast sums every year.
Look, the NHS is a bottomless pit into which public money is poured in ever-increasing quantities, and yet somehow the service at the other end, for a lot of people, appreciate in many respects they do a great job, but in in this of all times, the fact you can't get in to see your GP, despite the huge increase in the money that's spent on the NHS, is a sign that all is not good. I personally, I was health minister for a period, the most difficult job I was ever asked to do. Everyone hated you. Even dogs would cross the street to avoid having to go past you. I mean, it's a thankless task for politicians. But at the end of the day, I do not see how we can run an NHS that isn't able to say to people, if you're ill, come and see us. Now, if some people then make an appointment and they don't turn up, I think they should be penalised because it's so irresponsible, you know, and the rewards for irresponsibility in our society today are too great. This is one that should be removed.
Well, it's clear that there are some huge challenges in the NHS. Carolyn, how are we going to get those waiting lists down and try and sort of tackle this problem with people being able to access appointments if we don't try something like this?
Well, I don't think charging people is going to be the answer. I mean, the NHS is under a huge strain at this moment. I mean, they're just getting over a pandemic. They really need all the help and support they can get, but actually putting them in a position where they're having to find people, that's not going to endear them to the public. It's certainly not going to help them get the waiting list down. We need to come up with a more creative way, but it can't be charging people.
So what solutions do Labour have for us at the moment?
Well, the NHS has devolved in Wales, and they would never contemplate actually charging anyone for a missed appointment. And I cannot imagine that the UK Labour Party would support that policy either. But we need to put more resource into helping GPs get through their day. Maybe working on a Saturday morning, maybe working late in the evening, but certainly not actually charging people to make an appointment or don't make an appointment.
And David, again, going back to your reflections as Health Minister, do you think this is one of the biggest challenges that society is facing at the moment with regards to the NHS?
Well, obviously, because the reality is that the NHS is struggling to keep up with demand, and the NHS is struggling to get a consistent level of service across the country. Even when I was Health Minister, sadly increasing time ago, probably before you were born then, I'm disappointed to have to say. But the reality is that one of the struggles we always had was that the way in which some surgical teams could do an extraordinary number of complex operations. I remember Professor Magdi Yacoub, a pioneer of heart transplant. So he and his team could do 2 or 3 major operations in a day. You could go to quite a lot of hospitals and, you know, some of what we used to call the hammer and chisel people, you know, doing a bit of work on your bones and one thing and another. They couldn't manage that, even though it was an infinitely easier area of surgery to actually crack on through your list. And I am far from convinced that the NHS is making the best possible use of the increasing amount of money that's poured into it. And I do think that sometimes politicians let themselves down, because instead of actually being prepared to say, here's the money, we have to try and make sure that that value for money is delivered and take the NHS on value for money. We allow ourselves to fall out as politicians, saying, well, we should give them more, we should give them more. How much more do we realistically think we can give the NHS without impoverishing a whole lot of other equally important public services?
Yeah, I just think that the NHS is too heavy, is too top-heavy. There are too many managers and not enough people on the ground. So that's one way that we can address this, is actually have less managers, less people telling other people what to do, and more people actually doing the jobs. But there's community pharmacists, there's prescriber nurses, there's GP pharmacists. There's a whole range of issues that they can actually prescribe and diagnose without it having to go to a GP. It's about being creative. It's about creating a community hub, a one-stop, if you like, where you can go, and if you don't see the GP, you will see a qualified professional who can understand most things.
I'm glad we're back on the path of agreement now, because, of course, the NHS is supposed to be the National Health Service, but often, all too often, it's the National Sickness Service. And the irony is there'll be people sitting in a GP surgery who won't really be very ill, and often they're just attention seekers. There'll be someone walking by who will think he or she is incredibly well. They're about to have a heart attack, but they don't know it. And that's because all too often, the ways in which you can find out whether people are genuinely well were not pursued in the NHS. Now, I hope it's a great deal better than it was when I was Health Minister. We were determined to try and lay the foundations for a service where people's were not only dealt with for what symptoms they had, but where anticipation was made of the way in which people decline and the way in which diseases like heart disease and things like that creeps up on you, and a lot of people don't know they've got it, and they ought to.
But David, don't you think that some of these attention seekers, you call them, don't you think there's an element of mental health issues there that we should be addressing?
Of course.
Just because they don't look well doesn't mean to say they shouldn't be seeing a doctor or somebody for their issues.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And that's the problem with the present system. You know, look, a lot of people exaggerate their symptoms. For a lot of people, it's a form of illness to actually think that they're very ill when they're not. But I don't think it makes it any better if we say to those people, go and get an appointment, and if you're feeling a little bit better on the day, don't bother to show up. You know, and I think a service that's as expensive as the NHS, it has to be treated as a privilege to be able to go, and not to be something where you know, time waste. And there's so much time wasting in the NHS, there's no doubt about that.
But we are the envy of the world with our National Health Service. The very fact that we look after our citizens and we provide a service for them makes us exceptional in the world. I would hate us to go down the road of America or any of the other countries where everything is privatised, where people can't afford to be ill and people are suffering. And you know, it's a dangerous road, David.
But privatisation is a really sad thing, because it's just an old political smear that's thrown around. I mean, you know, once again, we are what we are. We are what our families made us. You know, my sister was a very senior nursing director within the NHS. I've always been very committed to the NHS, but that doesn't mean I think the NHS is perfect, and certainly doesn't mean that I think the NHS hasn't got a way to go to be as effective as it ought to be. But I think politicians do not do the public any service and don't do the taxpayer any service if we fall out with each other over whether or not it's privatisation or whatever, when all we're trying to do is to create a service where you get the biggest bang for your buck. And at the moment, within the NHS, we don't.
I think from my reflections, I've met very, very few, literally one or two in my entire time of Conservative Party members, supporters, voters, who actually would favour a fully private system. I think everyone else is fully committed to a system whereby if you turn up at a hospital, you get treated, you don't have to pay any money up front. If you turn up to a doctor, you can see a doctor. I think elements of, you know, private industry supporting services, delivering operations, etc., probably, for most people at home, probably is okay, as long as they can get seen and get their operation quickly. But I think I found it a bit disappointing. We talked about it on our show, I think it was last week, actually, with Paul Embry, around how often as Tories, the second we say we need to talk about NHS reform, it's always you just want to privatise. And I think it's probably not the case at all for, you know, 99.9999% of Conservatives. David, you've looked like you're agreeing there.
I do, yes. No, I'm disappointed. You know, I come on with you two women and I'm spoiling for a fight and you're not giving me one.
We can.
Actually, I'm just sitting quietly, drinking a little orange juice and becoming a sad old git in the country. So don't worry, I'm very happy to be agreeing with you.
Well, this is what GB News is all about. Good debate, fun debate, and everyone getting their say, the home of free speech. Well, as I said a couple of minutes ago, we've got him now joining me to discuss the recent pledge by Richie Sunak on GP appointments and being fined if you miss them, and to discuss the campaign as a whole is the chair of the Northern Ireland Select Committee and supporter of Richie Sunak, Simon Hall. Simon, thank you for your time this morning. So, quick overview, why are you backing Richie?
I think he's the candidate who gets the fact that it's always the economy that is the engine for all of the investment in public service we want to see. And I think as well that he's the candidate who can best unite the party. And that struck me very forcibly at his launch event when I found myself standing next to Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister. Dominic on a different wing of the party to me. I looked around and I saw colleagues representing all shades of opinion across the Conservative Party. And I think you know as well as I do that we're at our most attractive electorally when we are the broadest of broad churches. So we need to have that cross-party attractiveness to the electorate. We need to build a good, strong cabinet, and I think that Richie's the best person to do that.
So, Simon, obviously we've seen this pledge by Rishi Sunak led in the papers today around introducing fines if people miss GP appointments. We've had a bit of kickback from that on our show this morning. What's your take?
I think it's a very sensible and long overdue thing. My late father-in-law was a doctor, and he always thought that we should actually put the cost of prescriptions, the actual cost of the drugs, on our tablets and medicines as well, so that we would actually realise that there is a cost. And at a time when we're trying to end the backlog, reduce the backlog of GP appointments post-COVID, there are too many people. I remember sitting in Blandford Forum in my own constituency with the GP's practice, something like 20% of people had not turned up over a period of 3 or 4 months. That is annoying for the doctor, that's annoying for the receptionist. It's infuriating for other patients who are seeking appointments, being told that the list is full, and then people are not turning up. So I think it's a good idea, long overdue.
I'm keen to talk to you about tax policy, because this has seemed to be one of the clear dividing lines between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Now, Rishi was criticising Liz for unfunded tax cuts, and then the other day seemed to U-turn by saying that he would introduce a cut in VAT on energy bills. Is he being consistent there?
Well, you describe it to Henna as a U-turn. I think what we've seen from the Chancellor, from the former Chancellor, from Rishi at his time, was a series of bite-sized chunk initiatives to help people deal with the cost of living crisis. I know from my discussions with him several months ago that he was very alert to the pressure of VAT with regards to domestic fuel. He was very alert to the excessive tax take which the Treasury was having as a result of inflation. And he always saw that as something to be in the mix and with the potential to be delivered. So I wouldn't describe it as a U-turn. What I think it is, it's another instalment, if you like. It's another step in that direct, costed, funded, affordable approach to supporting people at a very difficult time when inflation is high. And that is why, I make no apologies for making this point again, it seems to me absolutely pivotal that if we want to have an economy that is both growing and delivering the taxes to fund public services and to make interventions such as he's suggesting now, such as we saw with furlough, you need somebody who actually understands from a practical point of view how the economy works and what it needs in order to make it work better.
And Simon, I want to talk to you a little bit about the current polling. I mean, polls are polls. As politicians, we have to pay them a little bit of attention to look at the trends. But looking at the polls of kind of party members, are you worried about Rishi Sunak's prospects of winning this race?
No, not in the slightest. If you see, there's still a very large chunk of people who are still saying, I don't know. I think that this was a contest which was not planned, so people weren't necessarily thinking about it, weren't assessing the runners and riders. Rishi, like Liz Truss, is travelling around the country talking to members of the Conservative Party, making their case. The feedback I'm hearing, he's coming to my constituency tomorrow for an event as part of a Southwest tour, is that I think the more people who are seeing him, hearing directly what he has to say, getting to see him in the flesh, people are liking what they see. They're liking the sincerity. They're liking the honesty. They're liking the realism. Any politician, gosh, you know as well as I do, we can make all sorts of very attractive, populist, popular, we'll do this, we can do that, and all the rest of it, which I think actually is very damaging to politics. There's that old phrase, isn't there, of Mario Cuomo, that candidates campaign in poetry and then govern in prose. I think it's very important at a time of very worrying times for people as far as household budgets are concerned, as far as inflation is concerned, the cost of living is concerned. I think people want to hear straightforward, factual, realistic, honest assessments of what can be done, how it can be done, and when it can be done. And I think that that's a very attractive proposition that Rishi Sunak is delivering to his audiences up and down the country.
Well, Simon, thank you for your time this morning. Simon Hall, their chair of the Northern Ireland Select Committee, telling us why he is backing Rishi Sunak to be the Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking mostly dry but cloudy, with some showers affecting southern and eastern England. Let's take a look at the details. Across southwest England, it will be a dry end to the day, albeit quite cloudy, though there is a chance of the odd bright or sunny spell throughout the evening. For London and southeast England, for many, it will be a dry evening, though there may be an odd shower that could be heavy. Across Wales, a mainly dry evening with just the odd spot of rain over the hill.